Welcome, everyone. I'm Layla Hussein. I founded the Dahlia Project, which was specifically for women and girls who've experienced FGM. But if I had to give you a brief description of the clinic, even though the women were FGM survivors, but 98% of the time, that's not what they talked about. They talked about all the other issues that they're facing in terms of, domestic violence, feeling marginalized, not having certain access to education. So we see women, who are from different backgrounds. But actually what's really special about the Dahlia Project is we don't, when I designed it for my mother and her friends. That's the way I created the clinic, because I thought, how do I get my mother and her friends to come for mental health services? Because that was a group that we knew wouldn't dare, seek mental health assistance. So what we became an outreach counselling service. So we partner with a local organisation where my mother and her friends tend to go and hang out. And what we started doing, we started running a 3-day workshop on actually understanding what a mental health service actually is, because a lot of people don't know what it is or how it works. And in those 3 days, we give them like a little taster what it's like to be in a therapy session, because you'll be shocked to know a lot of them still have a really terrible experiences in being in mental health services. So I think it's important that when we talk about mental health, it doesn't mean having access to any counselling service, but it's important we have, and we actually demand as a community that we do need specific counselling service. Maybe this is where your association comes in. We need a specific counselling services. So that's where I'm going to stop. So, guys, well done. That was absolutely, and also what I loved was the vulnerability you all brought to the stage. And actually the men who brought vulnerability, that's something that we don't see. Specifically black men who bring vulnerability to stage is not something that we get to see. So I would like to congratulate you for doing that, because I think there's a lot of men in the room, it's okay to be vulnerable, Just few, as I was taking some notes as you guys were reading your poetry, and a couple of themes that kept coming up was death and loss, acceptance, humor, which I really liked, because I use humor a lot. No, I think you used a bit of, I felt there was a bit of a humor in your poetry. And I'm someone who I know when I've written about my own depression, I think it's important to also confess that, I am someone who absolutely suffered from depression for many years, and writing helped, and I used humor. But one that I was actually struck by, which I don't usually see that we practice in our community, is declaring love. Because I felt your poem for your mother, I took that as you were declaring your love for your mother. Mm-hmm. So that was the theme I kept picking up. So maybe what would be great, maybe if we start at the end.
Okay.
Maybe if we just maybe describe an experience or why you felt writing about this particular issue was very important to you. I'm talking about mental health specifically.
Mental health specifically. Yeah. I don't know. I felt like, so I'm 17. So
wow.
Only 2 years ago I'd done my GCSEs, and that was like one of the first times like stress really came into my life, because like thankfully with like my family and my support system, I'd never really gone through like stressful situations, alhamdulillah. But when that came around, it was a time where stress really came at me, and it wasn't like early exams. There was like we had some like deaths in the family as well, and so everything kind of was coming at once. So I felt like the natural way for me to do it was to write everything down. And when I had my writing in one place in like a safe space, it felt better for me. It felt like, I don't know how to describe it. It was there. So I knew I'd written it down, so it wasn't all in my head. Like I knew it was normal because I was able to describe it.
It helped you express it by writing.
So because I was able to describe it, I was like, that makes sense. So what I'm feeling must be making sense. So
By the way, I have a daughter your age, just saying. I was like 17, oh my God. I have one at home right now. What about you?
Okay, it works.
Start bringing it closer.
Personally, I'm quite a very private person in general. So for me, writing was about just trying to like let everything out through an outlet. So I think it was last year of uni when I was like going through like stress and all that because of uni, and I remember I actually need to write out and to be very blunt about how I'm feeling without caring about anyone's opinions because it's just words on a paper. So that's what I basically did. That's all I've got to say.
I hear the humour in that response too.
I've definitely have used writing as a sort of coping mechanism, and that's been quite consistent throughout my life in writing poems, whether it was not doing well in exams or exam season comes or rejection letters. I always somehow wrote a poem, if not immediately, like the Teeth from the Shark poem. That was immediately after getting the email, and I was just like bummed out, so bummed out. And I wrote that poem maybe like within half an hour of just deep in it and just being in my bedroom. I remember it was really dark. I'd turn off the light and I was just bummed out. Or it can be like at a much later date when you're still thinking about and processing your feelings. And I've always used it as a coping mechanism. And on the theme of vulnerability, I've also allowed myself, or which has aided my ability to be vulnerable, is to use my faith also as a coping mechanism, as well as being confident with my own masculinity. And that's a true thing, because I remember when I was back in uni, I see that everything's happening in uni. Oh my gosh. I had a good experience, by the way.
There's a theme.
There's a theme, like
exactly
studying.
happening.
But in uni, I remember we organised a poetry event within the Muslim students groups, and one of my friends was speaking to this oldest mature student, quote unquote, and he said, "Oh, you should come to the poetry night. I went last year; it was really good." Blah blah blah. And this brother who, like, from the way we understand or visually the way we picture piety, says something wildly ignorant and actually very concerning. He said, "Poetry? I'm a man. I don't write poetry." Oh. And this is someone who, like, we perceive to be a very righteous person who was very close to Islam. We were like, actually, that's so, like, off, because the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, they were his, like, personal poets and writers, the oral tradition of writing poetry, and they were well known to be very vulnerable, but they were also known to be the strongest of men of our faith generation. So, like, for someone to say something absurd like that made it clear to me that actually keeping away from this sort of energy is really important for my own mental health, and allowing me to be vulnerable and not be afraid about the backlashes of what that looks like as a man. And that kind of allowed me to...
But also, just to come back to you again, something that you described, it sounds like your work is very much influenced by the triggers that you have.
Yeah, I'm triggered.
I'm using the term. It's triggers.
Totally. Yeah. Like most of my
and
poetry.
something that we all, even in this room right now, I know I was having a few triggers as I was sitting. I was like, oh my God, I really relate to this.
Most certainly. Yeah. I'm a bit of a triggered poet. That too.
Well, being triggered means you actually have feelings. Yeah. So it's not,
And it's how I responded to it that actually allowed me to deal with those challenges. Yeah. So I never use it, I never see it as a negative. I kind of like build on it. So.
Perfect, yeah.
Could you just repeat the question again, please?
What was the question?
Sorry, I went a bit.
I think that we started with a question, but the theme came back to vulnerability and masculinity. Maybe just carry on in that conversation.
For me, it was a very difficult stage for me. Like, I'm not for me to be open and to be vulnerable took me quite a long time to do. I might come across like the happy guy, the guy that's always laughing, making the crowd be okay. But it took me a while where I had to take myself out of the equation and think, like, am I doing okay? As a graduate from psychology and then learning about the stages of what a person goes through, like I was stuck in the first stage for a very long time. I was in denial for a very, very long time. I said, nah, this is not happening. Like when my father passed away, my love mercy, and I'm like, I said to myself, nah, it's just, you know, he's gonna come home soon. Every night was, no, I'm gonna hear that door open, the key's gonna unlock, and it's just gonna be another day. So for me, poetry, then it became like, you know what, it's affecting everybody around me. And I said to myself, like, I could see my brother being affected by it. I could see my cousins being affected by it. So it just took me a moment for me to be okay with myself first before I actually penned my first piece. And I remember actually performing at an event once, and I just broke down whilst performing. But it didn't stop me from performing this piece because I knew in the audience somebody could relate to what I was feeling, what I was going through and feeling. And for me, that's a self-achievement because I've now moved from stage 1 to stage 2 and slowly, trying to affirm the situation and accept that, you know, like, I'm sure this is not what he'd want me to be in a stage of denial that, you know, like every day be upset. So for me, it's like I'm trying to honor my father's legacy at the same time and also trying to maintain the household, trying to make the house still feel like a home. So like my brother and my siblings don't feel like, you know what, our older brother doesn't care for us, you know. So for me, it's like being okay with myself first, because there was no way that I could fill those shoes. Like there was a pressure on me, like you've got to be this way, you've got to be like your dad, you've got to do this. So all of that was becoming like was becoming like a mountain on my back. So I just had to take myself out of the equation and said, like, you know what, be okay with yourself first. Like I'm never gonna ever be able to fill his shoes, but as long as I'm doing everybody, like as long as I'm okay and the people around me okay, then that's me taking one step into filling his shoes. That's what poetry is.
You reminded me of when I lost a great mentor of mine who I was working with. You know, it was like losing a parent. And one of my colleagues, we were saying, oh my God, how are we going to fill in her shoes? And she just said something so simple. She goes, you don't need to fill in her shoes. Bring your own shoes, you know, to the space. And I think it's important. And I think it's something really important there in regards to, it's always important that we take care of ourselves first before we take care of others, because that's what I was hearing you say in that statement. Fatima, yeah.
So I was always surrounded by poetry, and my mom is a poet. She writes burambur and chants. And so burambur is a sort of is a poetry that's related that women usually use in the Somali community, and it's used in weddings, and you sort of chant it. So I was always surrounded by that at home, and my mum, the way she speaks is very poetical as well. My siblings are here, I'm sure they can testify to that. Like, yeah. Sometimes they don't understand what she's saying. I have to translate. So I think, and also being the eldest child as well, I think there's a certain type of burden and responsibility that comes with that. So I always felt like I had to go to my room and write, and writing was sort of an outlet for me to kind of express myself. And I think in the Somali culture especially, there's this like, we're taught not to, especially as women, we're taught to be really strong, and, you know, like that term that I use, the hero, you know, clutch your stomach tight, don't let the feelings come out of you, just hold it all in. And for a long time, that's what I did, until I realized that I couldn't do that any longer. But yeah, writing was definitely that way. It's therapeutic, and when I'm processing something or I need to make sense of something, I write, whether it's poetry or prose.
Actually, you kind of lead it on to my next question. Actually, any of you can jump in first. I remember in my clinic, so we're now going to be in 2 hospitals in London, and we are developing these leaflets for the Somali community. And the biggest challenge, we cannot find words like emotional well-being or, you know, great mental health. We only have one word, which is walan, like means crazy. So as writers, I want to know, maybe you guys might be the generation to create the actual words, because we couldn't find it. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, because, you know, if we're trying to reach out to our own community, then how do we do it if we don't even have the actual language or the right wording for it? Because we really struggled in a clinic. We had to come up with sentences but there was no word emotional well-being or, you know, something good for your soul.
My Somali is very limited to understanding.
Yeah.
I can understand, but I don't think I can give you a word because it's just that bad.
But what are the implications of not even having the right language? That's why as writers, you know, imagine not even having a word in our community. What kind of implications does that actually have on us as a community if we don't even have the word?
I feel like if you don't have, it's simple. If you don't have the word, you can't speak about it.
Yeah, it's silent.
Because there's no way to speak about it, and if the words that are like associated with it are stigmatized, like negative words, then the whole theme is just going to be stigmatized to like negative things. So I don't think we can create a word or like think of a word that will necessarily like be really good to be associated with it. I feel like it just has to start with conversation rather than starting with a trigger word. I feel like it has to start with, I mean, if you have to lie to some elders and say, you know, it's just some shah, we're just talking, it's just that, and then you trick them and you lead into it, and that's how you get them to talk, then I mean, that's
great.
Unethical,
I know, as a clinician, tricking people into therapy.
That's the only thing I can think.
Yeah, I get it.
But yeah.
Anyone in the panel have a different thought on that?
So the only thing that's coming into my head is our like own tradition of dealing with someone's difficulty. So like I've seen it within my family, maybe not so much my immediate, but my extended family. When someone's going through a hardship, I think the only solution that we do know as a community is Quran Sar.
Trigger words.
Yeah, I mean,
we've all been.
And as a person of faith, there's some challenges there, because for me, like that's perfect for me.
Yeah.
But that's because I have and it's difficult because I have, for others, they might not have that relationship with the holy text. So when the reciter is reading the Quran over you, you're actually disconnected because you don't understand the Arabic. So I have some like complications with that. But it's very selective to who that works for.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a remedy, like the go-to remedy in the Somali community. Whether it's the immediate difficulties or when we get into conversations of the supernatural, and we say "Jini agalit," and that causes its own like complications as well. And I'm not going to speak on that because I don't know the depth of that, so I'm not going to go too far on it. But I feel like Quran side is the only thing, reading Quran over someone as a remedy is the only thing that we know. And that's why we don't have that developed language that tackles those issues. This is the first time I really deeped it. I was like, oh yeah, we only have walad, like crazy, like cycle. And I was like, that's really problematic. So I don't know. I mean, I felt that so far, my whole understanding of the development of mental health services and the attachment to the literacy available is really dependent on younger people and expert professionals like yourself and the medical teams who can begin that journey. It has to start from somewhere, and if it's going to start from us young folk leading it and getting it into the older generations, like psyche, to understand it, then why not?
And I think it's also important to point out, even though we were trained in the West, one thing I realised when I was setting up the Dali project, which I talked to Fatima quite a lot, the Western version didn't actually fit in with the women I was seeing, and it became a challenge. You know, with all these boards where they were saying, but Layla, you cannot do that. And I was like, well, unfortunately, these particular women have a particular need in terms of what they need for mental health. That's also the other challenge in these spaces. But this is just a suggestion. Don't assume just because a Somali woman who lives in London will need the same, she will benefit from a counselling service mainly catered to white women, because that's a whole different need. And I think it's very important to remember that when we talk about mental health.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Do you guys wanted to add something?
No, not really. But it did come into my head that, like, I know the fact that there isn't nothing like positive for example, Nino Walonwai or Jino Khawa and stuff like that. But I think as part of the younger generation for myself, it would be like for us to not like find something positive about it, but to educate our future generation, to give them the understanding that, you know, if you see someone on the road and he's not sane, don't look down on him. He's had the past. This is his present at the moment. But if you were educated enough, you wouldn't go like, oh, look at him, start laughing at him.
Or you wouldn't say, well, hey, like that's not the
Exactly.
word you would use. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Just to explain to some people who don't speak Somali, walan means mad or crazy, and that's the word that's associated with mental health, mostly in the Somali community. And jinni qaba means you've been possessed, so there's a lot of association around possession, like devil possession and stuff like that. So you can read more about that online if you want to know about it. In terms of language, I think, language is so important. And I think because we don't have the right type of language, we're not able to combat the issue. And I think maybe this is something that maybe the British Somali Medical Association or any other Somali organizations that work around mental health can work with writers or people that are developing the language to try and find the right words for this. Because I think especially for the old generation who only speaks Somali, then we do need to have the language there. And I think also any of my poems that are on the theme of mental health or about anxiety, depression, or anything like that are always in English, because English is the language that I have access to those words. So I feel like, in a way, it's quite limiting not to have those words in Somali.
My actual favourite word is qalbi uran. That's my favourite one. That's a good one. Yeah.
Good for the heart.
Good for the heart.
Yeah.
Good for the soul. Good for the heart.
soul. Yeah.
That's the one I came with at the end. I was like, because I remember my grandmother used to say that to her, Layla qalbi uran, qalbi uran. I was like, why can't we use those words more often, even when we talk about mental health?
Absolutely.
Anyway, and I'm sure a lot of you are dying to ask a lot of. Is there a mic that's going to go around?
So that is a great word.
There's your next poem.
That
Qalbi
is
uran. The triggers are happening. Is there a mic going round?
Okay. Jonas.
Okay, anyone has a question? The audience? Right at the back. Someone at the back there.
Shana's going to write a poem, innit?
snap my fingers.
First and foremost, can I just say, you guys were amazing. You actually crushed it. It was very unnecessary because I just
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to ask the Somali Festival Week next year to be the theme should be well-being. We're going to make that request. Yeah, it really should. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mehdi. Actually, it's a very interesting idea that in Somali we don't have the words for mental health. I would say we have a lot of words for something similar to mental health. I don't know if it's exactly overlaps. We have murugo walbahar, where a lot of expression, maybe for traumatic events or something like that. So we have a lot of words. Also, the problem in the English-speaking world, we shouldn't take for everything as sent from heaven, as the ultimate truth. We have to realize that when we use a lot of words in the psychiatric field, it's not exactly pure science, and there's a lot of controversy. I don't know if you've read some excellent book like about that, and a lot of those terms used in psychiatry are very controversial, and a lot of those treatments have been lobbied for by pharmaceutical industries. So it's not exactly in the scientific field, and we shouldn't exactly try to superpose and take that as the gold standard if you want. At the same time, we should try to make use of our own words, and maybe try not to draw mental health as a continuum, and not things black and white ultimately. Thank you very much.
Can I remind the audience something? In this panel, I'm not only a psychotherapist. So I think when you ask questions, please make it about their poetry and actually why we're talking about mental health. And actually, you made a great point, and that's what I was saying earlier, in terms of the world of psychotherapy. One thing I found in setting up the clinic was I had to look at my clients' needs first and then develop the work around that. I think that's what you're saying, right? Yeah, got it. Anyone else has another question? Does anyone want to answer that statement? No? Okay. Somebody had their hand up on this side. Oh, I thought someone had their hand up. Anyone else? Oh, here we go.
I came fashionably late, so unfortunately I only caught half of you. But yeah, it was really beautiful what I did catch. I wanted to ask as well, obviously I know you guys are poets and you do write really beautiful poems, but do you journal first, or is it just pen to paper beautiful poems, or do you go through another type of writing process to get to the point of poetry?
For me, it's like I stand in front of the mirror and I'm just freestyling. Then I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, yo, that was dope.
We need to do that, yeah.
And then, but the funny thing is, 3 days have gone past, 4 days have gone past. I'm at that mirror and I'm like, what was that poem I get about again? So it takes, for me, it's, I write one, I leave it, because what I'm feeling at that stage may not be the same thing I'm feeling the next day. So I try to hone all of the emotions that I'm feeling within that week probably, and then go back to that first poem that I've written and then try, because for me, myself, it's not just about having something that's really sad. At the same time, I'm not a very sad person, so I want to remind myself that even after the storm, I am going to sail at the shore. So I remember that, yeah, because I'm about to forget that. So so that's my experience with like when it comes to writing.
Well, I'm the complete opposite because I don't really do spoken word, so I don't really stand in the mirror and just freestyle. But mashallah, I just literally will just write or on my phone, just like go off, literally just write, without editing, and just be very raw about how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking about. And 9 10 times I may come back to it or I may bin it. But yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, sometimes it's not that good, babe. It's like, nah, this is not gonna work.
I really like yours because, like, historically, poetry has always been an oral tradition, and I'm a real defendant of that. And as someone who is very reliant on the page as well, I think it's important to value the different forms of poetry that exist, and moving away from limiting poetry to some sort of very simplistic bourgeois. It only works on the page and never works anywhere else. And I've had some interesting conversations with various types of writers and people who are people who are what's the word?
Politically correct.
I'll come to the word anyway. So I really like that. So I'm really big on oral tradition, or I used to be more consistently, just off the top of my head, and come up with a few lines. Oh, okay, let me write it down. But it's going to be one that I only perform with that on memory. And then sometimes, depending on where I am, so pre-smartphone era, I was kind of very reliant on just writing on anything. So even if it was on the middle page of my school science book, you could just tear out the middle page, right? You just tear it out, and I use it to write because I don't have any notepads. Carrying a notepad wasn't a thing for me. All I cared about was playing football and scoring goals. So I was kind of just rip the page in the middle and write. Sometimes it can be very spontaneous. So if I don't have anything, and once I was on the train and I grabbed an Evening Standard while I was in college, just grabbed that and I wrote on the back of it. But most times it can be off reading something really interesting, something that might have popped up in the news, reading a journal. I'm really big on reading poetic journals. Poetry Society has some great journals that come out every month. And just reading books. So one of the most important things for any writer and anyone who's, even me, I don't call myself a writer, I call myself an aspiring writer. It's a process for me. Read books, read literature, read novels, read biographies. Give yourself a breadth of literary depth, and it allows you to kind of write in whatever form you want. And I think that's quite unique. So that's kind of my process.
Hi. For me, when I first started writing, which was only 2 years ago, it was more like a frustrated response at our government and it not being that good. So I just
Still not good.
Still not good. So that was just me, just everything on one page, so it just all came out, and I don't think I really changed it. I was like, that's how I felt at the time, that's how it's gonna stay. But when it came into, oh, Hamida, you're kind of like becoming like a poet, what? So I was like, maybe I should like write more like a poet. It didn't work. I'm not good at like rhyming schemes and like whatever. I just couldn't do that. So now, and my family know this, I have a bunch of notes that don't make sense. So it's like one word or like one phrase, and I won't come back to it for like 4 to 5 months sometimes. But that word or phrase still always has meaning, so the meaning never goes away. So I can always come back and finish the poem. And sometimes that I have notes that are still there from like 2 years ago. So it's easier for me because then I'll be like, okay, I feel like that way again, so I'll just finish it this time. Like, I can finish that emotion, and me feeling in this certain way is finished, though that poem is done at the same time. So that's kind of how I write.
Sorry, I forgot one thing, because this is a huge inspiration for me. But I was heavily inspired by hip hop, and that's still my go-to now, and I don't see it as something that, oh no, it's not writing, we kind of shove it to the side. And I hate that attitude, because I grew up on hip hop first more than anything else. Common is my favorite hip hop artist of all time. My brother knows this. he knows. If I ask him, I'm like, oh, who's my favorite rapper? He knows it's Common. And lyrically, I'm fascinated by rappers like him and Jay Electronica and other hip hop artists. And sure, I might have a difficult relationship with the new generation, 6ix9ine, cough cough. But either way, you can take so much from their style and flow and literary devices. But for me, hip hop had a massive influence in the writing process as well. But sorry, that was
I also think that you shouldn't just read poetry or literature. I think it's important to look at any source of inspiration. So, because I'm an artist, so I love documentaries. Like, I'm an addict, and I love going to the Tate Modern and just chilling and just any photography. So don't think that as a writer you have to be, I don't know, have to like, what's the word? Go to uni and like study English lit, because 9 grand a year is a bit peak. But if you do want to work on your craft in terms of like how you write, that also is online. You can figure it out. So don't think, oh, because I didn't go to uni, I didn't do this, or I didn't have the right background, I can't write. That's complete rubbish. So if you love drama, then go for that.
Fatima, would you want to add anything to that? What's your process? That was the question.
Yes. Well, poems used to just, or certain themes used to come to me before, where I'd be walking down the road. I always used to have a notepad in my bag, and I'd find myself like leaning on a tree and like writing in the park, or like, you know, inspiration would come to me almost like magic. I don't know, it's a weird way to describe it, but it was a sort of spiritual experience. And sometimes I'd even be woken up from sleep thinking about something, or a poem would come to me. But nowadays I find that doesn't happen so much anymore. So I kind of have to force myself to write. And I'm quite lucky in the sense that I have been going to a poetry class for the last year. And my teacher is here, Catherine, who's amazing. And I think poetry workshops and classes are really good. There's a lot of them in the evenings, and you have a 2-hour slot where you get set tasks, and you read other people's poems, and then you get to give feedback. And sometimes we're given objects, and we have to write about that. That might, you know, intrigue some sort of memory. So yeah, I find that nowadays I have to kind of schedule it in the writing time, and I know that I have a deadline. You know, every middle Wednesday of every month I have to go into the class, and I have to make sure that, you know, I have my poems ready, and, you know, so I think that structure helps nowadays. But there are the instances where certain poems will come to me, especially if I have if something upsets me or something angers me, and then I feel like, oh, I just can't, you know, take away that feeling, then I'll write about it. But yeah, I think structure is quite important as well. Like, and yeah, one of my favorite poets is Maya Angelou, and I studied English literature, so I did a lot of reading.
No, pun intended.
But did you pay £9,000 a year though?
Pardon?
Did you
No,
pay-
no,
okay,
I
there
went
we
well
go.
cool.
We don't fit into that category, don't we?
I'm sorry.
Any more other questions? We've got a few more minutes before we have to wrap up. Yep. We'll put the mic here.
Hi everyone, great work. Really loved everyone's pieces. It was fantastic, mashallah. I just had a really quick question about growing up and getting into poetry. I'm not sure how young you guys were. You're pretty young when you started, but I don't know how young you guys were when you started writing poetry. But what kind of support did you find at a younger age? Did you find it hard to get support, not just from parents or teachers, but from your peers getting into poetry and, you know, finding mentors and all of that?
I started very late, 25 at the time, so you could figure out how old I am now. But I remember I was writing about it, and I told my aunt, who's in the audience, hi, and she was very supportive, mashallah. But then at the same time, I also learned that with everything that you do in life, you have to have a tribe who's on the same level as you, in the same area, on the same situation. So what I did is checked out Mr. Google and just Googled all types of schemes, writing groups, and just applied. And alhamdulillah, I got in a few schemes, I got into that, hi. But I think it's really important just to have a bit of faith. And if you're too scared to tell your friends about it or your family, fair enough. But on Google, you're anonymous. You can apply. You can do whatever you want to do. And when you're ready, you can then speak to your your family and friends. But I would say just try and find research about it. You only have one life, just shoot your shot and see what happens, I would say. I'm being serious, but okay.
That's good advice. Anyone else want to add something to that in this panel?
For me, it started, I said 16, so at 16, I hated maths, never loved it. So you can imagine, in the era of when people used to graffiti the front of their pages and stuff like that, I was that one in the corner that was just using a maths book, which got all them little squares where you put numbers in. I'm there writing words. But at this point of my life, they don't make any sense. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just doodling. Even until this day, even at work or wherever I may be, I'm just writing something, but it just doesn't make sense at all. So for me, at that point, I didn't classify myself as anything but just a person just doodling. But then it was when I think about in year 11, doing GCSEs and doing mocks and thinking about the question might be something on descriptive writing. It started to make my thoughts started to flow. But from 16 up until year 11, there wasn't, for me, it wasn't something serious. So I wouldn't say maybe the support was there, but at the time I didn't know about it. So all my friends, they were on the playground, they have the little Sony Ericsson playing some Nokia beat, and everyone's rapping over it, thinking they're the next big thing. And I was back in the back thinking, nah, that's not me, I can't do that. But and as it's the process has been quite long, but I'm grateful for those moments because I look back at it and I think, what were you going through then? All you had to think about was GCSEs, but now I feel like there's so much more support for poetry, for writing. So as for my work, I only shared it with people I trusted, because when you share that kind of vulnerability, you become very aware of who you open up to, because you know that at a certain point that person might not be in your life anymore. So for them to have that part of you, you feel like you're robbing me of that thing that I've given you. So for me, it was either my cousins or a few friends that I had, and then obviously Instagram came about. And even on Instagram, I'm still anon, so I don't show face or anything. It's because I just want my work to be appreciated rather than to be known for who I am as a person. So I'd say to anybody that wants to pursue such a thing of writing and stuff, the worst thing you could possibly do is lie to yourself whilst you're writing. Even if you're not sharing that piece is yours, so you own it, and it's yours.
Yeah, man. I think I had some interesting support in the most loving way. So like, I'll give you like a role play of like what happened when my friends saw my poetry. They're like, "Oh, yo, Mo, is that you? Yeah, my brother, sweet boy. Oh, is that you? That poem is nice still." And that was in reaction to
love.
It's love, and it's a way of expressing it. But that my nickname in secondary schools came out as Sweet Boy. Because everyone in the playground went, "Yo, sweet boy, what you saying? What you saying, Mo?" And I'm giving you exact words as to the support I had around me, and that was when my friends found my poem. It was my first poem. It was a very cheesy poem. It was a love poem about a girl. Sitting behind me in my French class, I've got a poem about this. And so my friends saw that, and they're kind of like, "Oh, hey, bro, this is like rap. I like it. And the only acceptance was only through the prism of hip hop, and that's cool. Like I was cool with that, and it made me feel confident as a person. You know, boosting my self-esteem. I was very confident to write, and I had good networks around me. So like my English teacher was a huge inspiration to me, and she gave me very good feedback. And that might not be the case for everyone, but it was the case for me. And I had a really cool writing group. So in South London, this side of the river, is a youth organisation called Elase Network. Hey, shout out. I still volunteer for them as an alumni. Elase, like at the beginning of their era, like 2003, were just like a Somali weekend Islamic school for young people. But then it grew out of loads of the girls really like taking ownership, like 03, 04, 05. And like just doing loads of programming, like fun events, theatre plays, and in every play that they did with the Battersea Arts Centre had some sort of poetic influence, or like the play started with poetry, or in the play there was a poem, and I kind of saw that, and I saw my friends, like girls who went to the same school as me. They're like, "Oh, Mo, you should write a poem. We've got this event, blah blah blah," and this is like 06, 07. So from a really young age, I had people around me who were writing. And it made the process for me to engage with that much easier, and especially as a young man who was told socially to like suppress my emotions or suppress any sort of like, you know, just be cool about everything, like just be chill, like don't act moist, right? And I kind of like people around me were quite cool, and we were very like confident in our masculinity. Had to show that love, so I was very fortunate in that sense. And even to this day now, I'll get a message from one of my friends like, "Oh, sweet boy, long time, where you been?" Or my favourite one, a poem I have called "Somewhere in London," I was called the Flower Boy. So Flower Boy was another nickname of mine. I can't remember it, so I'm not going to try to spit it now. So I did have really interesting support around me, and it was easy because coming from the Somali community, like we have an embracing culture around poetry.
Yeah.
And it might have made it easy that my mother told me once that my grandmother wrote poetry, my great grandmother. So I was like, swear that's where it's coming from. Yes. I was like, that makes
play
sense.
a big role in terms of who we become, anyways.
And it was supportive because, like, here today, my brother's here coming to support me at another event. My sister would come, another event, my mum, my wife. So I'm always bouncing around, and I have that support network around me. And it just gives me confidence in this craft that I'm trying to produce. Shout out to the Mandem anyway.
What was the question again? Sorry.
What kind of support?
Yeah, I have a good support system. I think my biggest support is my cousin, Rahma. Like, I think she's my biggest supporter, because it was like when I said like 2 years ago, yada yada yada, got like mad at the government, wrote a bunch of stuff, and I remember where I was.
Can hang out.
I remember I was in the corner of the living room. My cousin, she was the only one in the room. She was sitting on the sofa. And, like, I remember just like, oh, my God, I wrote this. And then, like, she was there, so I just I just said it to her. And after a while, it wasn't really, like a big thing for me. It was more like, okay, this is, like, I'm just writing this. You're letting your emotions out. And then at school, I don't remember how this spread. But apparently my head teacher had found out that I write poetry. And she's the type of woman who, when she finds out you're passionate in something, she will push you to to get involved in that. And she basically, it's a long story, she came up to me, she invited me to her office, and I thought I was in trouble, even though I never got in trouble, but I was like, my heart was beating fast, and I got there, and she was like, you write poetry, right, to me? And I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, I didn't want anyone to know, but now you know, everyone knows. And she was like, well, we have this event with like the Department of Education. Would you like to talk in front of them? And I said, but in my head, I was like, they're the exact people I'm like cussing. I was like, do I want to like be known for that? And I showed her my poem, and I was like, but miss, you do see like indirectly, I directly called them out. And she said, you know, we can sort that out. She changed a few things. She changed a few things that like it was less, but I got there and I called them out.
Yes.
Nothing changed, but I still
good.
Them,
it feels good.
Yeah, I still called them out.
Yeah.
So I feel like it didn't start off as something I kept to myself, and I'm kind of glad for that I got pushed into something so big, because then I'm a particularly like private and shy person. So if you know something like I write poetry, then you must be really close to me. So the fact that it like got pushed out and loads of people knew about it, then it meant that I could actually speak about it. That gave me like the push to, okay, this is real, you do this. Yep. And I remember, I think, was it that year that we went to, I don't remember if that's the year we went to Hargeisa, but that was also the first year I met my Aya and my Awa from my dad's side, and I found out that my Aya wrote poetry as well. And like, I didn't find out that she wrote it from someone telling me. She just started like
reciting
it, and I went,
wow.
Whoa, this is cool. And I feel like after she like started speaking, and she's like, that's something you can see she's like really passionate about. I was like, yeah, I want to continue doing that like back home. So I'm taking a piece of her with me. So yeah.
Oh wow.
Fatima, before I come to you in terms of support, I think what you're all describing, I think, and demonstrating, actually, if you have the right support, it means you've been accepted for who you are. And I think that's a great lesson for everybody. Yeah.
In terms of support, I think the first person that recognized my love, and I guess it's very weird when you say my talent, but I'll own it and say my talent, was my secondary school English teacher, Mr. Philip Masterson. And he really encouraged me to write and pursue English. And that's why I ended up doing it as an A-level, and then I studied English literature as a degree, and I, kept at it. And I think for a long time, I was writing poetry, but I was sort of a closeted poet. But I would share it with my friends and family, and they would kind of push me towards sharing it on a stage or sharing it with the world. And without their support, I think I probably wouldn't have done that. But yeah, it's a scary thing because I think poetry and writing is quite intimate, and you're being very, very vulnerable and bearing yourself. It's almost like you're appearing naked in front of people, and that's not an easy thing to do, bearing all. And you don't want to not do it properly. You don't want to keep things back. You just want to do it in the way that you feel is right, and for it to come out the way that that it's coming out of you. And I guess, and that's something that I think as I get older, I'm working on being comfortable with being vulnerable and being comfortable with who I am and expressing my experience. And that's just as valid as anyone else's, and not judging myself in thinking that I'm a particular type of poet, or I'm not like that person, or it's not as good as, the poets that I read. I think, it's a process.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our session. I know we're going to be in here for another hour. But thank you all for coming and really committing to this. I think it's quite evident that we need more space like this, and I think to use poetry and mental health together, I think it's such a great a combination of, thank you to the, let me get it right, the British Somali Medical Association for supporting this, and the Somali Festival Week for really organising, because I think such spaces are needed, and I hope there's more of this. And actually, I said to Fatima and the festival organisers, I said, I hope next year the theme is actually well-being. because I think we are a community who really, when it comes to mental health, we are in a very scary situation right now, and we're not talking about it, but the more spaces we create where we can actually have the conversation, I think the panel made that very clear today, that let's just start that conversation. And I would encourage you all, after you leave tonight, start creating spaces where we can talk about these issues.
We have some certificates from the British Somali Medical Association for the poets as a thank you for participating in this event. And yeah, one of the members will come up and present them.
I'm Dr. Zachary as well, but Ali. So this was really inspiring, and we're really appreciative of having taken part in tonight's event. So starting with you, Fatima.
Thank you.
Very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, and another round of applause for our amazing poets.
Thank you.